They were about to bury a living girl. Let's be brutally honest here. Everyone in that goddamn mansion was just waiting for the clock to run out. The doctors, with their hushed tones and sympathetic lies, had given the billionaire's only daughter, Lily Thorne, 3 months. 3 months until her body finally gave up the ghost. Her father, Marcus Thorne, a man who could bend markets to his will, was now a hollowed-out shell, throwing millions at a disease that just laughed and took another piece of his child. The nurses came and went, their sterile professionalism a thin veil for their pity. But Lily, she was just silent. A porcelain doll with vacant eyes, fading faster than a photograph left in the sun. Then she arrived. A new maid, Amelia Vance. She didn't look like a savior. She looked like someone who knew her way around grief. Quiet, careful, almost invisible as she moved through the sterile halls of the estate. But Amelia saw things. She noticed the slight flinch when a door slammed, the way Lily's eyes followed a sunbeam on the floor, the faint tremor in her hand that wasn't from the sickness. She started asking questions, not to the doctors or the nurses, but to the silence itself. And in that suffocating silence, she found something. A secret, buried so deep it was practically fossilized. What she unearthed wasn't just a cure. Hell, it wasn't even about hope. It was a goddamn conspiracy, a betrayal so profound it would tear this family's world to shreds and expose a monster hiding in plain sight. Before we pull back the curtain on this nightmare, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. And I want to know where you're tuning in from, so drop your city or country in the comments below. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Marcus Thorne was once a titan. His name was a verb in the world of finance. To Thorne, someone meant to utterly dominate them in a deal. He built an empire from nothing, his mind a razor-sharp instrument of logic and strategy. But all that power, all that genius, evaporated the day he buried his wife, Eleanor. A sudden, senseless car accident had stolen the architect of his heart, and the Marcus that remained was merely a ghost haunting the halls of his former life. He retreated from the world, liquidating assets and severing ties. He bought a sprawling, minimalist fortress of glass and steel nestled in the desolate hills of Northern California, a place where the silence was as vast and unforgiving as the sky. The mansion was filled with priceless art and cutting-edge technology, but it was a mausoleum, a tomb for his ambition and his joy. Marcus rarely spoke. His world had shrunk to a single agonizing focus: his daughter, Lily. She had been diagnosed with a rare, aggressive form of cancer shortly after her mother's death. The diagnosis was a second bullet to Marcus's soul. The treatment was a brutal, relentless assault on her small body. Her beautiful blonde hair fell out in clumps, leaving her pale and fragile. She withered. Marcus became her shadow, her constant guardian. He administered her medications, held the bowl when she was sick, and read to her for hours, his voice a monotone drone against the oppressive quiet. But even with him there, a chasm had opened between them. Lily retreated into a world of her own, a place where no one could reach her. She was quiet, distant, her gaze fixed on something beyond the walls, beyond the pain. It was as if she had already left. Marcus, a man who solved problems for a living, was confronted with the one problem his money and his mind couldn't fix. He threw his fortune at it like a madman. He flew in specialists from Zurich and Tokyo. He funded experimental therapies and holistic retreats, art therapists, music instructors, even a goddamn animal therapist with a miniature pony. He tried them all, desperate for a spark, a single flicker of the little girl he'd lost. He filled her room with books she didn't read, toys she didn't touch, and gadgets that gathered dust. Nothing. She didn't smile, she didn't play, She didn't speak. Most days she would simply sit in her oversized armchair by the window, a tiny, frail figure dwarfed by the landscape. Marcus felt a helplessness so profound it was a physical weight, crushing his chest. In business, failure was an opportunity to pivot. Here, failure was a death sentence. And it wasn't just the cancer that was killing her. It was something else. A profound, unreachable sorrow. He couldn't penetrate the wall of silence she had built around herself. He missed her laughter, the endless stream of questions that used to fill their home. Now she was a specter, a living memory of his failure. His routine was rigid, militaristic. Up at dawn, prepare Lily's bland breakfast, chart her vitals, cross-reference her medication schedule. The daily nurses were competent, but Marcus trusted no one. He hovered, he double-checked, he documented every sigh, every twitch, in a series of leather-bound notebooks. He thought that if he could control the environment, he could control the outcome. If the house was perfectly clean, the meals perfectly timed, the regimen perfectly executed, then maybe, just maybe, the chaos inside her body would submit to his will. But the silence was always louder than his frantic efforts. It was a living entity in that house. Lily's communication was reduced to the barest minimum, a slight nod, a slow shake of the head. Most of the time, there was nothing. Still, he talked to her, narrating his day, reading her business articles, telling her stories about her mother, hoping a word, a memory, would act as a key and unlock the door to her mind. At the heart of it all was guilt, a monstrous, festering guilt that consumed him. He believed, in the darkest corners of his soul, that he was responsible. If he'd been home that night, maybe Eleanor wouldn't have been on that road. If he had been a better father after she died, maybe Lily wouldn't have gotten so sick. The happy memories were landmines. He kept the family photos locked away in a drawer, unable to face the smiling ghosts of his past. They were a testament to everything he had lost, everything he had failed to protect. When Lily was asleep, he would retreat to his cavernous office, the command center of his former empire, and just sit in the dark. The silence was different then. It was an accusation. His friends had long since stopped calling. His board of directors ran the companies without him. He didn't care. His entire existence had been distilled into a single, desperate mission: save Lily. He thought if he could just fix her, he could somehow earn his own forgiveness. But day after day, Lily remained a silent statue, and Marcus remained a broken man, both of them trapped in a beautiful, empty prison of their own making. The mansion had 50 rooms, but their world was just 2. He had painted her room a soft lavender, her favorite color, and filled it with plush animals and cashmere blankets. It made no difference. She still looked through them, not at them. Sometimes she would draw. The drawings were always the same. Stark, empty landscapes. A single, leafless tree. A house with no doors. He kept every single one, studying them like ancient texts, searching for a clue to the geography of her sorrow. He was a king in a silent castle, and the only person he wanted to save wouldn't even look at him. All he could do was wait and watch her disappear. Amelia Vance knew what it was like to live with a ghost. 6 months ago, she had held her daughter, Chloe, for a total of 72 minutes before a complication from the birth stole her away. The loss didn't just break her heart. It shattered her world into a million silent pieces. She quit her job as a graphic designer, moved out of the apartment she had so carefully decorated with a nursery, and retreated into an existence defined by absence. Every corner of her new, smaller apartment was a reminder of the future that had been stolen. She didn't talk about it. The grief was a private, sacred thing. One morning, scrolling listlessly through job postings, she saw an ad. It was vague. personal aide and household assistant needed for a private residence, light duties, care for a young girl. It didn't ask for medical experience, just patience and discretion. Something about it called to her. Maybe it was the mention of a child. Maybe it was the promise of a quiet place where she could just exist. She applied without a second thought. The first thing Amelia noticed when she arrived at the Thorne estate was the silence. It was a physical presence, pressing in on her from all sides. The house was immaculate, a masterpiece of modern architecture, but it had no soul. It was a museum, not a home. Marcus Thorne met her himself. He was tall and imposing, but his eyes were hollow. He didn't smile, but his voice was polite, detached. He explained the situation with clinical precision. His daughter Lily was terminally ill. She didn't speak. He didn't expect miracles. He just needed someone to help the nurse, keep the house in order, and be unobtrusive. Amelia accepted. She moved into a small, sterile guest room at the back of the mansion. The other staff, a cook, a gardener, were transient, keeping their distance. They whispered that the job was too depressing, the silence too heavy. But Amelia wasn't overwhelmed. She was used to silence. She was used to pain. This house felt like her heart looked, pristine on the outside, shattered on the inside. For the first few days, she was a ghost herself. She cleaned, she organized, she assisted the nurse with supplies. She never approached Lily directly. She watched. She saw a little girl who spent her days staring out a window, a girl who never made a request, who barely acknowledged the people tending to her body. And what Amelia saw wasn't just sickness. It was a profound, soul-deep loneliness, a spiritual emptiness. Amelia recognized it intimately. It was the same void she carried within herself. She didn't see a patient. She saw a fellow survivor of an unseen shipwreck, adrift in a silent sea. So she began her work. Not with words, but with actions, small, quiet gestures of care. She left a hand-knitted, impossibly soft blanket at the foot of Lily's bed. She placed a single, perfect gardenia in a small vase on the nightstand, its scent subtle and calming. One afternoon she found a small, antique wooden music box. She wound it up and left it on a table near Lily's chair. She didn't say a word, just walked away. But from the hallway, she saw Lily's head turn, ever so slightly, toward the gentle, tinkling melody. It was a start. Amelia would often just sit in the hallway outside Lily's open door, reading a book. She wasn't intruding. She was just there. A quiet, constant, undemanding presence. Slowly, things began to shift. Lily started holding her gaze for a second longer. A flicker of awareness. Amelia would respond with a small, soft smile, never pushing, never expecting anything in return. She knew that trust, with someone so wounded, was a currency you earned in micrograms. Marcus noticed. At first he was suspicious, but Amelia wasn't like the others. She wasn't bubbly or falsely optimistic. She didn't try to fix Lily. She treated her with a quiet, profound respect, as if she's understood the sanctity of her silence. Marcus felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere of the house. Amelia's presence wasn't loud, but it filled a void he hadn't even realized was there. One evening, he was walking past Lily's room and saw her. She was holding the little music box, her small thumb tracing the faded painting on its lid. It was the first time in over a year he had seen her voluntarily touch an object. That night, Marcus called Amelia into his office. He didn't offer praise or flowery words. He just looked at her and said, "Thank you." It was more than enough. He didn't ask her to do anything different. He just told her to continue. A quiet language developed between Amelia and Lily. No words were needed. When Lily would shiver, Amelia would be there with a blanket. When she saw Lily's gaze linger on the garden, Amelia would bring her a book of botanical drawings. One day, Amelia left a sketch pad and a set of charcoal pencils by her chair. The next morning there was a drawing. A single, leafless tree. But this time, a tiny bird was perched on one of its branches. Amelia wasn't trying to heal Lily's cancer. She was trying to reach the girl trapped inside the failing body. The grief she carried for her own daughter gave her a unique lens. She didn't see a medical chart. She saw a soul in agony. She wasn't trying to erase Lily's sadness. She was simply sitting with her in the dark, a silent promise that she was not alone. For Amelia, this was no longer a job. It was a calling. She felt that perhaps by mending the broken pieces of this little girl's world, she could begin to heal her own. Amelia had been at the estate for nearly a month. The rhythm of the days had become a familiar, quiet hum. The silence was still there, but it felt different now. Less like an absence, more like a pause. One afternoon, she was helping Lily after her bath. The girl had started to allow Amelia closer, a silent acknowledgement of trust. Today, Amelia offered to gently brush the few soft, downy wisps of hair that were starting to grow back on Lily's scalp. She used a brush with the softest bristles, moving with the careful tenderness of a bomb disposal expert. Suddenly, Lily stiffened. She flinched, pulling away slightly, and a single, choked whisper escaped her lips. Amelia froze, the brush hovering in midair. The words hung in the silent room, sharp as broken glass. "It hurts. Don't touch, Mommy." Amelia's heart stopped. Her mind reeled, trying to process what she'd just heard. Lily had called her Mommy. It wasn't the word itself that stunned her into silence. It was the tone. It was laced with a genuine, remembered fear. It wasn't a mistake or a moment of confusion. It was a reflex, a trauma response. Amelia stayed perfectly still, her own grief a sudden, sharp pain in her chest. Lily didn't look at her. Her eyes were fixed on the floor, her tiny hands twisting the hem of her pajama top. Amelia slowly lowered the brush. In a voice she fought to keep steady, she said, "Okay, we're all done." She didn't ask why. She didn't probe. But inside, her mind was a firestorm of questions. Lily had never spoken a full sentence to her before. Barely a word. And this was charged with an emotion that had nothing to do with a hairbrush. The word Mommy wasn't spoken with longing. It was spoken like a plea from a nightmare. Something was deeply, horribly wrong. Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that she had just stumbled upon a key, but she had no idea what lock it opened. A cold, heavy doubt began to settle in her stomach. After she settled Lily back in her chair, Amelia walked through the silent hallways, her steps on autopilot. She replayed the moment, the words, the tone, over and over. Lily's mother was dead. Marcus had made that clear. Was Lily just confused by her illness? Was her mind playing tricks on her? Or was this a fragment of a memory? A memory of what? Amelia, a woman who knew the landscape of loss intimately, understood the power that word held. But this felt different, darker. The fear in Lily's voice was too specific. A chilling unease began to creep over her. The immaculate, quiet mansion suddenly felt sinister. The silence no longer felt peaceful. It felt like it was hiding something. In the following days, Amelia became a detective in a one-person investigation. On the surface, she was the same quiet, diligent maid. But her eyes missed nothing. She noticed how Lily would instinctively shrink away if someone approached her too quickly from behind. She saw how Lily would sometimes stare at Marcus when he entered the room, her expression unreadable but tense. These were tiny, almost imperceptible details, but when strung together, they formed a disturbing pattern. She also noted the conspicuous absence of Lily's mother. In a house where a child was grieving, there were no pictures of her. Children often talk about a lost parent, creating stories or clinging to memories. But around Eleanor Thorne, there was a vacuum, a void. Amelia once asked Marcus, in the most casual tone she could manage, if Lily ever spoke of her mother. His response was clipped and final. "No, she doesn't." He shut the conversation down so fast it was like slamming a steel door. That sealed it for Amelia. It wasn't just about what was happening now. It was about what had been erased. The silence around Lily's past was becoming deafening. One evening, while dusting the seldom-used study, Amelia's hand brushed against a row of old financial ledgers on a bottom shelf. Behind them, she felt something else. A large, leather-bound photo album. It was coated in a thin layer of dust, clearly untouched for a long time. Her heart pounding, she carefully pulled it out and opened it. The first few pages showed a happy, vibrant family. Marcus, younger, smiling. A beautiful woman with warm, laughing eyes. Eleanor. And a baby, Lily. They were at the beach, at a birthday party, in a park. But after the third page, the album stopped. The remaining pages were empty, hollow slots where pictures should have been. There were no photos of Lily as a toddler, no first day of school pictures, no holidays. It was as if her life had been systematically censored around the age of 3. Amelia closed the album, her hands trembling slightly, and slid it back into its hiding place. The questions were no longer whispers in her mind. They were screaming. Why would a father hide the memories of his child's life? What happened to that happy little girl in the photographs? From that moment on, Amelia's mission changed. This was no longer just about providing comfort. It was about uncovering a truth she felt, with every fiber of her being, was being deliberately concealed. That one whispered word, "Mommy," had been a distress signal from a sinking ship. And Amelia, having lost her own precious cargo to the sea, knew she couldn't just stand on the shore and watch. She had to dive in, no matter how dark and cold the water was. She didn't have a plan, but she had something more powerful, a silent, growing certainty that Lily wasn't just sick. She was a prisoner. Amelia began to use her free time to explore the forgotten corners of the mansion. Her search wasn't idle, it was methodical. The house had numerous storage rooms, filled with the artifacts of Marcus Thorne's former life. One afternoon, while organizing a linen closet near the basement entrance, she noticed a set of misaligned floorboards beneath an old rug. Prying them open, she found a small, hidden compartment. Inside were several cardboard boxes, sealed with yellowed tape. The labels were faded, but she could make out a name, Dr. Alistair Finch, and below it, Lily's name. Her heart hammering against her ribs, she lifted one of the boxes. It was heavy. Back in the privacy of her room, she carefully cut it open. The contents made her stomach clench. It was filled with old medication vials, used injection kits, and stacks of clinical-looking paperwork. The dates went back years. As Amelia sifted through the items, she noticed the drug names were unfamiliar. Many had stark warnings printed in red. Some were labeled simply with alphanumeric codes. This wasn't standard chemotherapy. She took out her phone and began photographing the labels. That night, with the entire mansion shrouded in silence, Amelia sat on her bed, the glow of her phone illuminating her worried face. She began her research. A few of the drugs were recognizable as aggressive, last-resort cancer treatments, but others were different. She found them mentioned in obscure medical journals and online forums for experimental drug trials. The listed side effects were horrifying. severe neurological impairment, hormonal disruption, long-term organ damage, and profound psychological disturbances, including memory loss and emotional passivity. One of the drugs had been fast-tracked and later suspended in several European countries after a series of catastrophic patient outcomes. Amelia felt a wave of nausea. She now had a potential explanation for Lily's weakness, her silence, her vacant stare. These weren't just symptoms of her cancer. They were the results of a chemical assault on her body and mind. Why would any doctor prescribe this? Who had allowed this to happen? The thought that Marcus might have knowingly approved this was too monstrous to contemplate. He was desperate, yes, but would he poison his own child? She didn't sleep. Her mind raced with scenarios, each one darker than the last. Was Marcus a victim of a manipulative doctor, or a willing participant? Confronting him without irrefutable proof was dangerous. If he was innocent, she risked shattering the little trust they had. If he was complicit, she could be putting herself, and more importantly, Lily, in grave danger. The weight of this knowledge was crushing. She had seen how fragile Lily was. Now she wondered if the girl's condition was not an act of fate, but an act of man. Perhaps the treatment wasn't a failed cure. Perhaps it was the very source of the problem. The next day, Amelia moved with a new, grim purpose. When the nurse arrived with Lily's daily medication, Amelia watched like a hawk, mentally noting the names, the colors of the pills, the dosages. She observed everything. Later, she slipped into Lily's bathroom and compared the current medications with the photos from the box. Several names matched. They were still giving her these drugs. She needed more. During a rare moment when Marcus was out of the house, she slipped into his office. Lily's medical files were kept in a locked filing cabinet. But Amelia had noticed Marcus always kept a spare key in the top right-hand drawer of his desk. Her hands shook as she unlocked the cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. She didn't have time to read everything, but she quickly scanned lab reports and doctor's notes. The pages were filled with jargon and acronyms she didn't understand. She took photos of several pages, focusing on Dr. Finch's handwritten notes. Closing the cabinet and locking it, she felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't just a hunch anymore. This was real. Something terrible was being hidden, and it was centered on a vulnerable child's health. She couldn't carry this burden alone much longer. The responsibility was suffocating. Every time Lily obediently swallowed a pill or passively received an injection from the nurse, Amelia had to fight the urge to scream, to snatch the medicine away. She started a secret journal, documenting everything: medications administered, times, Lily's reactions, her own observations. It was her only way of maintaining some semblance of control. Her connection with Lily had deepened into something fiercely protective. The girl had started to trust her, to seek her out with her eyes, to offer a small, fleeting smile. Amelia couldn't just be a bystander while this potential horror continued. She was no longer just a maid. She felt like a guardian, a secret protector. And she knew with a terrifying certainty that she would have to go to war to save this child, even if it meant fighting the very man who had hired her to care for her. The silence in the house was no longer just sad. It was deadly. Amelia had become Lily's anchor in a silent, turbulent sea. Every day she reinforced their bond not with grand gestures, but with the quiet consistency of her presence. She learned the subtle language of Lily's moods, the slight downturn of her lips that meant she was in pain, the brief widening of her eyes that signaled curiosity. Trust wasn't spoken. It was built, moment by moment, in the shared quiet. And slowly, miraculously, Lily began to emerge from her shell. She would reach for Amelia's hand. She would lean her head against Amelia's shoulder while they looked at a picture book. These were seismic events in the still landscape of their lives. Amelia felt she was getting closer to the epicenter of the girl's pain. One afternoon, the house was quieter than usual. Marcus was away at a rare, unavoidable business meeting in the city. The nurse had finished her duties and left early. It was just Amelia and Lily in the vast, sun-drenched living room. Lily was curled on the sofa, nestled under a cashmere throw. Amelia sat on the floor beside her, sketching in a notepad. There was no music, no television, just the sound of their breathing and the scratching of Amelia's pencil on paper. Then it happened. Lily sat up, her movements slow but deliberate. She looked at Amelia, and for the first time, her eyes weren't vacant or scared. They were clear and filled with a profound, weary sadness. She slid off the couch, crawled the short distance to where Amelia sat, and did something that shattered Amelia's world. She leaned forward and wrapped her small, frail arms around Amelia's neck. The hug was feather-light, but it carried the weight of a lifetime of unspoken words. Amelia froze, every muscle in her body tensing with shock. Then, instinctively, she wrapped her arms around Lily's tiny frame, holding her as if she were made of spun glass. That's when the whisper came, a breath against her ear, so soft she almost missed it. "Don't leave me, Mommy." Amelia's breath hitched, a flood of emotion, grief for her own lost Chloe, fierce love for this broken child, and a chilling, terrible certainty welled up inside her, and hot tears began to stream down her face. She couldn't speak. Her throat was a knot of unshed sobs. She just held Lily, rocking her gently, her own body trembling. The words, "Don't leave me, Mommy," echoed in the chambers of her heart. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't confusion. This was a plea from the very core of Lily's being, a desperate cry for a safety she had lost, or perhaps never even had. In that moment, it didn't matter if Lily was mistaking her for someone else. What mattered was the raw, undeniable trust being offered. This child was handing her the broken pieces of her heart and begging her not to drop them. Amelia pressed a gentle kiss to the top of Lily's head. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered, and she had never meant anything more in her life. The tears continued to fall, a silent baptism for the bond that had just been irrevocably sealed between them. For the first time, Lily had spoken from her soul. That moment became a sacred touchstone for Amelia. It was a confirmation. Lily saw her as a protector, a source of safety. For a child who lived in a fortress of silence, bestowing the title of Mommy was the ultimate act of surrender and trust. Amelia had never sought to replace Eleanor Thorne, but she now understood that she had been given a role far more important than that of a caretaker. She had become a mother in spirit, chosen by the child herself. This new reality came with an immense, terrifying pressure. If Lily trusted her this much, she could no longer wait. She had to act. She had to save her. She didn't tell Marcus what had happened. Not yet. The moment felt too intimate, too fragile to be exposed to his grief and potential disbelief. It belonged to her and Lily alone. From that day on, Amelia became even more a part of Lily's world. She adjusted her schedule, finding excuses to be with her almost constantly. They read, they drew, they sat in the garden and watched the clouds. Lily didn't repeat the word, but her actions spoke volumes. A constant touch, a head resting on her lap, a quiet reliance that was louder than any shout. The wall hadn't just been breached, it was crumbling. Amelia now knew, with a certainty that felt almost preordained, that she was in this house for a reason. She hadn't just found a job, she had found a destiny, not one chosen by Marcus Thorne, but by his daughter. In her own silent, profound way, Lily had chosen Amelia to be her champion, and that changed everything. The embrace was more than a hug. It was a coronation. Amelia had just been crowned Lily's guardian, and she would fight to the death to protect the queen. Marcus came home early. The meeting had ended abruptly, and a strange, restless energy had propelled him back to the silent fortress on the hill. He didn't announce his arrival, letting himself in through a side entrance. He walked down the long hallway toward Lily's room, drawn by the faint murmur of a voice. He'd expected to find the nurse, but the voice was softer, gentler. The door was ajar. He peered through the crack and his heart constricted. Amelia was sitting on the floor, Lily cradled in her lap, her head resting against Amelia's chest. Amelia was whispering a story, her hand stroking Lily's back in a slow, soothing rhythm. It was a picture of such profound peace and intimacy that it felt like an intrusion, a violation. He pushed the door open, his footsteps unnaturally loud on the hardwood floor. "What do you think you're doing?" His voice was ice. Amelia looked up, startled. She started to gently move Lily, but Marcus's anger filled the room like a toxic gas. "Are you trying to replace my wife? Is that it?" he snarled, taking a step forward. "She is a sick, confused little girl. You are taking advantage of her." Amelia stood up, placing herself protectively in front of Lily. "Mr. Thorne, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," he boomed. "You're an employee, nothing more." But then, the unthinkable happened. Lily, who hadn't shown a strong emotion in years, who had been a passive doll through countless procedures and tantrums, scrambled to her feet. She ran, not to her father, but to Amelia. She wrapped her arms around Amelia's legs, burying her face in her skirt. And then she screamed the words that shattered the world. "Mommy, don't let him yell at me!" The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum that sucked all the air, all the anger out of the room. Marcus froze, his mouth agape. His face, which had been a mask of rage, crumbled into sheer, unadulterated shock. He stared at his daughter, clinging desperately to the maid, and then at Amelia, whose own eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and vindication. Julia gently placed a hand on Lily's head, a silent act of reassurance. The moment stretched into an eternity. For Marcus, it was a cataclysm. He had never, not once, seen Lily react with such strength, such purpose. She had always been a leaf in the wind. Now she was a rooted tree, and she had chosen her ground. And it wasn't with him. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He sank down onto the edge of Lily's bed, his legs suddenly unable to support him. He looked older, defeated. "She called you. Mommy," he whispered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Amelia nodded slowly, her expression full of a sorrowful understanding. "She has before. She's scared. She needed someone." Marcus didn't answer. He just stared at his daughter. But for the first time, he was truly seeing her. Not as a collection of symptoms and diagnoses, but as a terrified child who had found a safe harbor. And in that blinding flash of clarity, he saw something else. Maybe her sickness wasn't the only thing destroying her. Maybe the silence, the isolation, the endless aggressive treatments. Maybe he had been part of the problem. He stood up, a broken man, and walked out of the room without another word. Amelia knelt and held Lily, whispering that everything was okay. The battle had just been fought, and the victor was a little girl's terrified scream. Later that night, Marcus didn't sit in his dark office. He went to the locked filing cabinet, the one Amelia had opened just days before. He took out Lily's entire medical history and spread it across his massive desk. He read every single word. But this time, he wasn't reading as a grieving father desperate for a cure. He was reading as the ruthless businessman he used to be, searching for an inconsistency, a flaw in the data. The names of the experimental drugs now seemed to leap off the page. He remembered Dr. Finch's smooth, confident explanations, his reassurances that this was cutting edge, the only hope. Marcus had clung to those words, had signed the consent forms without question. Now, with the sound of his daughter calling another woman Mommy ringing in his ears, those words sounded like lies. Without consulting anyone, he made a decision. The next morning when the nurse arrived, Marcus met her at the door. He handed her a list of medications. "As of today," he said, his voice cold and resolute, "we are discontinuing these. All of them." The nurse looked at him, bewildered, but the look in his eyes dared her to argue. She simply nodded and complied. He didn't explain his actions to Amelia. He wasn't ready to admit how wrong he had been, but a shift had occurred. The foundation of his belief system had been fractured. Over the next few days, a subtle miracle began to unfold. It wasn't dramatic. It was 1,000 tiny changes. Lily seemed clearer, more present. She ate a full bowl of oatmeal. She asked Amelia to read a story to her, and then asked for it again. She picked up a yellow crayon and drew a sun in the corner of one of her stark landscapes. Marcus watched from a distance, his heart a painful mix of hope and profound regret. One afternoon, he saw Lily smile at something Amelia said. A real, genuine smile. He hadn't seen her smile in 3 years. That one small curve of her lips was more damning than any lab report. It was proof. The treatment hadn't been failing to save her. The treatment had been killing her. The thought was a dagger in his heart, but for the first time in a long time, it was followed by something else. A fragile, terrifying, and utterly beautiful glimmer of hope. He now knew something had to change, because he had seen the truth in his daughter's eyes. She was still in there, and he had almost let them extinguish her light for good. The suspicion that had been a whisper in Amelia's mind was now a deafening roar. The small, undeniable improvements in Lily since Marcus had stopped the medications were all the proof she needed. But she knew that to fight a monster like Dr. Finch, she needed a weapon. She needed proof. One afternoon, feigning a need to clear out old supplies, she went back to the hidden compartment under the floorboards. She carefully selected one of the sealed vials of an experimental drug, one with a complex alphanumeric code instead of a name. She wrapped it meticulously in cloth, tucked it into the bottom of her purse, and waited for her day off. She didn't go to the police. She went to the one person she trusted implicitly, her college roommate, Dr. Carla Ramirez, a brilliant and no-nonsense toxicologist at a private lab. In the sterile quiet of Carla's office, Amelia laid out the entire story, her voice low and steady. Carla listened without interruption, her expression growing more grim with every word. She took the vial without hesitation. "I'll run a full analysis. I'll call you as soon as I have something." The 2 days that followed were agonizing. Amelia went through the motions at the mansion, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. Then, the call came. Carla's voice was stripped of all warmth. It was the cold, hard voice of a scientist delivering a devastating finding. "Amelia, you were right to be worried," Carla said. "This is bad, really bad." She explained that the vial contained a potent, unapproved neurosuppressant cocktail. It was designed for short-term use in adults with extreme psychotic disorders. It had never been tested on children. The concentration in the vial was 5 times the maximum recommended dosage for a full-grown man. In a child, Carla explained, it would induce a state of extreme lethargy, suppress cognitive function, and cause cumulative damage to the nervous system and internal organs. It would, in effect, mimic the symptoms of a terminal illness, slowly shutting down the body and mind. Amelia sank onto her bed, the phone shaking in her hand. A cold dread washed over her. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't malpractice. This was a deliberate, systematic poisoning. Luna wasn't just being over-medicated. She was being executed in slow motion. Carla continued, her voice filled with controlled fury. This drug isn't illegal, but its use is so restricted it's practically invisible. Whoever prescribed this knew exactly what they were doing. Amelia knew who. The name on all the paperwork, the man Marcus had hailed as a savior, Dr. Alistair Finch. The polite, distant doctor with the reassuring smile was a monster. She took the printed lab report directly to Marcus. She didn't soften the blow. She laid the papers on his desk and watched as he read them. The color drained from his face. He read the report once, then twice. The silence in the room was thick with horror. "I trusted him," he finally whispered, his voice cracking. "He told me he could save her." Amelia placed her hand on the desk. He wasn't trying to save her, Marcus. He was using her. For the first time, they were a team. The businessman in Marcus roared back to life, fueled by a righteous, terrifying rage. He got on the phone, calling in favors, pulling strings he hadn't touched in years. Together, they launched a covert investigation into Dr. Finch's entire career. Amelia scoured online patient forums and news archives, while Marcus used his resources to unearth sealed legal documents and professional complaints. It didn't take long for the horrifying truth to emerge. Dr. Finch was a predator. He had a history of miracle cures that ended in tragedy. There were a dozen other families, other children, with stories of unexplained side effects, sudden declines, and quiet settlements. One boy had developed irreversible heart failure. A girl had fallen into a coma. But Finch was slippery, protected by a wall of legal jargon and the prestige of his institution. The final, damning piece of the puzzle came from one of Marcus's contacts. Dr. Finch had deep financial ties to a small, aggressive pharmaceutical company. He was being paid millions to conduct unsanctioned, off-the-books clinical trials for their most dangerous and experimental drugs, using the most vulnerable patients as his guinea pigs. Children like Lily. The betrayal was absolute. Marcus was consumed by a guilt so profound it threatened to swallow him whole. He hadn't just been blind, he had delivered his own daughter into the hands of her executioner. Amelia didn't let him drown in it. She knew that grief and guilt were luxuries they couldn't afford right now. They had to fight. They contacted a lawyer, a bulldog known for taking on corporate giants. They began reaching out to the other families, sharing their evidence, building a coalition of the wronged. Some were too scared to speak. Others were eager for a chance at justice. What began with Amelia's suspicion had now snowballed into an impending avalanche. Amidst the storm of legal calls and late-night strategy sessions, Lily continued to blossom. Unburdened by the chemical poison, she was slowly, beautifully, coming back to life. She was a constant, living reminder of what they were fighting for. They were no longer just seeking justice for one child. They were on a mission to expose a rot that went to the very heart of the medical system. The man in the white coat was a wolf, and they were about to burn his forest to the ground. With the evidence compiled, a mountain of lab reports, financial records, and heartbreaking testimonies from other families, Richard and Amelia, flanked by their lawyer, presented their case to the district attorney. The prosecutor, a sharp woman with a reputation for tenacity, saw the truth immediately. A formal investigation was launched. The story was too explosive to stay quiet. It leaked to a major news outlet, and suddenly the case of Dr. Finch and his miracle cures became a national scandal. He wasn't just a rogue doctor. He was the face of a terrifying conspiracy involving a pharmaceutical company that had prioritized profits over the lives of children. Lily's story, the billionaire's daughter brought back from the brink, was the human element that made the headlines irresistible. But fame came with a price. As soon as the case gained traction, the fight turned dirty. The pharmaceutical company's PR machine went into overdrive. Anonymous articles appeared online painting Marcus as a negligent, grief-stricken father who had pushed for risky treatments. They portrayed Amelia as an opportunistic gold digger, a manipulative homewrecker who had brainwashed a sick child. The lies were vicious, and they spread like wildfire on social media. Marcus was deluged with hateful emails. Amelia found her tires slashed one morning, a note tucked under the windshield wiper that read, "Mind your own business." They received anonymous, threatening text messages warning them to drop the lawsuit. Their lawyer told them to expect it. "When you poke a billion-dollar snake," she said, "you have to expect it to bite back." Marcus was incandescent with rage, but Amelia remained a pillar of calm. "They're scared," she told him one night, her voice firm. "That's how we know we're winning." They refused to be intimidated. If anything, the attacks solidified their resolve. As the trial date approached, the public support for their cause grew. Inspired by their courage, more families came forward, their stories adding weight to the prosecution's case. One mother testified in a preliminary hearing about how her son suffered permanent brain damage after a treatment from Finch. A father spoke through tears about the daughter he lost. Each voice was another nail in Finch's coffin. Behind the scenes, the legal team was relentless, uncovering a web of secret payments, falsified research data, and corporate cover-ups. The media outlets that had initially smeared them began to retract their stories, issuing apologies as the tide of evidence became overwhelming. Through it all, their sanctuary was the mansion, which was slowly transforming from a tomb into a home. The true miracle was happening within its walls. Lily, oblivious to the legal firestorm raging around her, was thriving. The girl who had been a silent ghost was now a vibrant child. She drew constantly, her pictures now filled with color and life. She laughed, a sound that echoed through the halls like music. She even started asking to have friends over from a local homeschooling co-op. These moments were the fuel that kept Marcus and Amelia going. Every smile from Lily, every new word she learned, was a testament to what they were fighting for. The legal battle was draining, but inside the house, there was a constant, beautiful reminder of their victory. The silence had been replaced by the sounds of a child's life being lived. One evening, Amelia was tucking Lily into bed. The little girl looked up at her with her now bright, clear eyes. "You and Daddy are fighting the monsters, right?" she asked. Amelia smiled and smoothed her hair. "That's right, sweetie, we are." "You're very brave," Lily said, her voice full of conviction. Those simple words were a shield. Marcus and Amelia were no longer two broken individuals bound by grief. They were a family, forged in fire, a united front against the darkness. The fight was far from over, but they had something more powerful than any corporation or smear campaign. They had the undeniable truth, and they had the love for a little girl who had found her voice, and, in doing so, had taught them how to use theirs. Justice was no longer a goal. It was an inevitability. The trial of Dr. Alistair Finch was a media circus. After months of legal maneuvering, he was finally arrested, his perp walk broadcast on every major news network. When the trial began, the courtroom was packed every day with reporters, activists, and the families he had destroyed. One by one, they took the stand, their voices trembling but resolute, painting a devastating picture of a man who saw sick children not as patients, but as lab rats. The collective grief and anger in the room was a palpable force. Amelia and Marcus sat in the front row, a silent, unshakable unit. When it was Amelia's turn to testify, she walked to the stand with a quiet dignity. She didn't need notes. She told her story with a clear, steady voice, how she arrived at the silent house, the small inconsistencies she noticed, the whispered word, "mommy," that started it all, the discovery of the drugs, the lab report that confirmed her worst fears. She didn't use emotional language. The facts alone were damning enough. The jury hung on her every word. Her testimony was the methodical, logical framework upon which the entire case was built. When she was done, she walked back to her seat and squeezed Marcus's hand. He followed soon after. On the stand, he was not the powerful titan of industry. He was a humbled, broken father. He looked directly at the jury and admitted his own blindness. He spoke of his crippling grief, his desperation, and the blind faith he had placed in a man who promised a miracle. "I was so desperate to save my daughter," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "that I failed to protect her. I will live with that guilt for the rest of my life. If it weren't for Amelia Vance, I would be burying my child right now." His raw honesty was more powerful than any legal argument. It showed the jury how easily any parent, no matter how smart or powerful, could be manipulated by a predator in a position of ultimate trust. Lily, of course, did not appear in court. Amelia and Marcus shielded her from the spectacle. But her presence was felt in the most powerful way imaginable. On the third day of the trial, the prosecutor submitted a piece of evidence. It was one of Lily's recent drawings. It showed a simple picture of a little girl with short, fuzzy hair, standing between a tall man and a woman with a kind smile. They were all holding hands under a brightly colored sun. Beneath the drawing, in a child's shaky handwriting, were 4 words: "I am safe now." The prosecutor projected the image onto a large screen for the courtroom to see. A hush fell over the room. Several jurors were seen wiping tears from their eyes. The drawing wasn't medical evidence, but it was the heart of the trial. It was a testament to the life that had been stolen and, miraculously, returned. It was the voice of a child who had finally been heard. The jury's deliberation was swift. After only 2 days, they returned. The courtroom was electric with tension. When the foreman stood and read the verdict, guilty on all counts, a collective, shuddering sigh of relief went through the gallery. There were no cheers, only quiet, cathartic tears. Dr. Finch was sentenced to life in prison. The verdict also triggered a wave of reform, with new federal laws being proposed to oversee experimental drug trials, forever known as Lily's Law. Marcus and Amelia didn't wait for the media scrum. They hugged their lawyer, thanked the other families, and walked out of the courtroom, hand in hand. The war was over. They could finally go home. And home was a different world. The mansion was no longer a cold, silent monument to grief. It was alive. It was filled with laughter, with the smell of baking cookies, with the sound of Lily practicing the piano. Marcus was present, truly present, for the first time in years. He wasn't a ghost anymore, and Amelia was no longer an employee. She was family. They had walked through the deepest valley of pain and betrayal, but they had emerged on the other side, not just as survivors, but as a family reborn. Justice had been served in a court of law, but the true victory was the sound of a little girl's laughter echoing through the halls that were once silent. Hope had returned, and it was here to stay. Life after the trial was a gentle unfolding into a new kind of normal. The world outside might have seen them as figures in a sensational news story, but inside the mansion, they were just a family learning how to be whole. The first, most important step was giving Lily the one thing she'd never had: a childhood. They enrolled her in a small private school with a focus on the arts. Amelia would pack her lunch every morning. And Marcus, who had once commanded boardrooms, now found his greatest joy in driving his daughter to school. Lily, who had lived in near total isolation, blossomed. She made friends, excelled in her art classes, and discovered a passion for storytelling. The girl who was once silent now filled notebooks with stories, and her sketchbooks with vibrant worlds born from her imagination. She was still small for her age, a permanent reminder of her ordeal, but her spirit was boundless. Years later, her school nominated her for a National Youth Award recognizing exceptional courage. At a formal ceremony in Washington, D.C., Lily, now a poised young teen, stood on a stage and accepted a medal. She didn't speak of her sickness, but of the power of having someone who believes in you. In the front row, Amelia and Marcus wept openly. Her story inspired others. She began receiving letters from children in hospitals, from families facing their own desperate battles. Her journey had become a beacon. Then came the day that redefined their family forever. At a school awards assembly, Amelia was called to the stage. She was confused, thinking it was a mistake. But then Lily stood up, holding a small, official-looking envelope. With the school principal beside her, Lily's voice rang out, clear and strong. "For years, Amelia has been my friend, my protector, and my hero," she said. "But in my heart, she's always been something more. She's my mother in every way that matters." The principal then opened the envelope and announced that, with Marcus's full blessing, and after a long legal process, Amelia Vance's adoption of Lily Thorne was now official. Amelia stared, utterly speechless, as tears streamed down her face. She stumbled onto the stage and pulled Lily into a fierce hug as the entire auditorium rose to its feet in a thunderous emotional ovation. In that moment, the last broken piece of all their lives finally clicked into place. The years that followed were a blur of beautiful, ordinary moments. Marcus cleared out the largest, sunniest room in the house and helped Lily turn it into a magnificent art studio. Her talent, once a quiet escape, became her voice. She was accepted into a prestigious art college on a full scholarship. Several years after she graduated, invitations went out for her first solo gallery exhibition. The show was titled The Silence and the Sun. On opening night, the gallery was filled with people. The walls were covered with her life's journey, rendered in charcoal, ink, and brilliant color. One powerful piece depicted a small, hairless girl curled in a vast, empty room. The next showed that same girl holding the hand of a woman, walking out of the darkness and into a field of wildflowers. At the front of the room, Lily, now a confident and graceful young woman, gave a speech. "People often ask me where I found the strength to survive," she said, her eyes finding Amelia and Marcus in the crowd. "My strength didn't come from a drug or a treatment. It came from a heart. It came from Amelia's heart. She taught me that the opposite of sickness isn't health, it's love. She became the light I followed home." The room was utterly still. As she finished, the applause was deafening. Later, as guests mingled, looking at the art with a new, profound understanding, Lily walked over to Amelia, her hand finding its old, familiar place in hers. She was no longer a fragile girl needing protection. She was an artist, a survivor, a testament to the healing power of unwavering love. Her past was not a scar she had to hide. She had taken it, shaped it, and turned it into something beautiful for the world to see. It was no longer a memory of pain. It was a masterpiece of hope. And now, we've come to the end of our story. I can't thank you enough for sticking with us on this incredible journey. What part of this story hit you the hardest? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. Until next time, thank you for watching.